Although they vary in size and color, pigeons and doves are all similar in having short, straight bills and relatively small, rounded heads. On the ground, they bob their heads back and forth stiffly as they walk with short, quick steps. In the air, their flight is swift and direct, and flocks may be seen flying to favored watering sites. Pigeons and doves feed mainly on seeds and small berries. The familiar park pigeon, common in cities throughout North America, is descended from the wild rock dove of Europe. Today's pigeons are quite variable in color, from white to rufous to black, but the original pattern was a gray bird with a white rump patch, dark tail band, and slight purple and green iridescence on the neck. Feral rock doves now nest around buildings, bridges, and other structures. The big, band-tailed pigeon is common through much of the West. Even larger than the rock dove, it may be recognized by its black-tipped yellow bill, pinkish tones on the head and chest, and broad, pale band at the tip of the tail. Adults also have a narrow white half collar around the back of the neck. In the Southwest and along the northern Pacific coast, it is primarily a summer resident, and it can be seen all year in California. Flocks may wander from the mountains to the valleys as different food sources come into season. Found locally in southern Florida, mostly in the Everglades and the Keys, the white-crowned pigeon is dark, slaty gray except for its trademark, the white cap. White crowns are common throughout much of the Caribbean, and flocks are often seen flying from one island to another in search of the tropical fruits on which they feed. Named for its mournful song, the mourning dove is among the most widespread and familiar of North American birds, living in open countryside and often in towns. It is pale, buffy brown, with a black spot on the face and others on the wings. There's a faint wash of pink on the underparts and gray on the back, but the best field mark is the long, pointed tail. When it flies, the wings make a whistling sound, and white flashes in the sides of the tail. In winter, mourning doves may gather in large flocks to roost. Toward the northern edge of their wintering range, they tend to be uncommon and local. In summer, the canyons and riverside groves of the Southwest echo with the crowing of the white-winged dove. Shorter-tailed and heavier-bodied than the mourning dove, the white wing is most easily recognized by its bold white wing patches, most conspicuous in flight. Although they are abundant in the Southwest during the summer and spring, most white wings depart abruptly in early fall. The few that remain through the winter are mostly found in towns. Recently, the white wing has also become a common resident locally in southern Florida. An Asian bird brought to Los Angeles around the turn of the century, the spotted dove is now locally common in Southern California. It is most common in suburban areas around shade trees, lawns, and citrus groves. The spotted dove has a slightly shorter tail and a deeper, ruddy pink wash on the chest than the mourning dove. There is a spotted half collar around the back of the neck, hard to see on young birds. Short-tailed and small, hardly larger than a sparrow, the common ground dove is found locally across the South. It feeds mainly on seeds and will come to bird feeders placed near cover. Seen at rest or walking, it looks rather plain, with dark scaling on the chest and black spots on the wings. In flight, it shows a rufous patch in the wing. Although it can be found all year throughout its range, the ground dove seems to be more numerous in summer than in winter in the Southwest. In the warmer parts of Texas and the Southwest, one of the most familiar birds of parks and yards is the little Inca dove. The dark, scaly effect on its plumage is more pronounced than that of the common ground dove, and it has a longer tail. When it takes flight, the Inca dove flashes conspicuous white in the tail, as well as a rufous patch in each wing. The wings make a rattling sound on takeoff. Its mournful two-noted song, suggesting the words "no hope" to some listeners, is heard incessantly in spring. In the more arid parts of the Southwest, the Inca dove is almost always found around cities, towns, and ranch houses, not in the open desert. Found worldwide, the members of the cuckoo family are mostly medium-sized, long-tailed, insect-eating birds. Some cuckoos are famous for laying their eggs in the nests of other birds, but the North American members raise their own young. Our species may be divided into three very different groups: the typical cuckoos, the roadrunner, and the anis. A shy bird of the forest, the yellow-billed cuckoo would often go undetected but for its loud, clattering calls. Seen in flight across a clearing, it looks slim and long-tailed, with a rufous flash in the wings and bold black and white spotting in the tail. Cuckoos are among the few birds that readily eat furry caterpillars. Yellow-bills may become locally abundant where there is an outbreak of gypsy moth caterpillars or other species. In recent years, the yellow-billed cuckoo has become quite rare at the western edge of its range. A plainer bird is the black-billed cuckoo, which lacks the rufous in the wings and has smaller white tail spots than the yellow-billed cuckoo. Shy and elusive, the black-billed rarely permits the close view needed to see the narrow red ring around the eye. Its summer range extends farther north than that of the yellow-billed, but it is absent from the southwest. The most famous bird of the southwestern deserts is the greater roadrunner. The reputation of this ground-dwelling cuckoo is sometimes exaggerated, but it is true that the bird can run 15 miles per hour, and it does eat snakes, rattlesnakes included. It also eats many insects, lizards, and occasionally small birds, catching its prey with short, quick dashes. Most common in deserts, the roadrunner can be found in small numbers as far east as central Arkansas. Little groups of smooth-billed anis may be found locally in southern Florida, around the edges of marshes and brushy areas. They might be mistaken for other long-tailed blackbirds, such as grackles, except that anis have curiously arched bills like puffins, and their feathers have a permanently disheveled look. In flight, anis proceed with several quick flaps followed by an unsteady glide. On the ground, they shuffle or hop about rather clumsily. Replacing the smooth-billed ani in Texas is the groove-billed ani. The two anis have similar habits, and they also look very similar in the field. The grooves on the bill are difficult to see except at very close range, but the groove-billed has a smaller, less arched bill than the smooth-billed ani. In its more westerly distribution, the groove-billed ani is often found in drier country than the smooth-billed, sometimes feeding on insects flushed by grazing cattle. Most members of the nightjar family are birds of mystery, heard by night but hidden during daylight. Most likely to be seen are the so-called nighthawks, often abroad by day. All nightjars are cryptic brownish birds with short, broad bills for catching insects in flight. Seen on roads at night, their eyes reflect headlights with a reddish eye shine. Despite its name, the common nighthawk is not a hawk, nor is it active only at night. Foraging high above the ground, often by day, it may be known by its erratic flight and by its angular pointed wings with white patches near the tip. The common nighthawk punctuates its nasal call notes with a remarkable display, featuring a steep dive and creating a loud rushing or booming sound with its wings. It lays its eggs on bare ground, but it also has learned to nest on the gravel roofs of buildings, so the nighthawk has become a city bird in some areas. Found almost throughout the continent in summer, the common nighthawk winters in South America. Replacing the common nighthawk locally in southwestern deserts is the lesser nighthawk. The two nighthawks are very similar, but the lesser is smaller and buffier, and the pale bar on the wing is closer to the tip. On the female, this bar is buff, not white. The lesser nighthawk has no booming display and no loud call note. Usually silent, it sometimes gives a low-pitched trilling or whinnying sound. Named for its call, the whippoorwill is heard far more often than seen. It lends a familiar voice to the nighttime woods over much of the east and in the mountains of the southwest as well. By day, the whippoorwill rests quietly on the ground or on a tree branch where its muted brown pattern blends perfectly with the background. If approached too closely by day, the whippoorwill may fly away through the woods, flashing large white patches in the corners of its tail if it is a male. In forests of oak or pine in the deep south, the chuck-will's widow leads the nocturnal chorus. It is larger and longer-tailed than the whippoorwill and is shaded in warmer browns. The corners of the tail are mixed buff and white on males, in place of the pure white patches shown by the male whippoorwill. In recent years, the chuck-will's widow has spread northward in some parts of the east. In arid parts of the west, the common poorwill calls at night from dry canyons and rocky hills. Patterned in browns and grays like other nightjars, it has a shorter tail than most of its relatives, with small white patches in the tail corners. Its winter range is not well known. Some poorwills have actually been proven to hibernate, and they may emerge to call on warm winter nights. Widespread in the American tropics, the common paurake is found year-round in brushy woods and mesquite thickets of southern Texas. In flight, the paurake might be mistaken for a nighthawk because it also has a white bar across each wingtip. However, the paurake has more rounded wings and a long, rounded tail. It hunts only at night, while nighthawks are often abroad by day. Swifts are superb flyers, fast and powerful, that speed through the air in pursuit of flying insects. Almost all of their waking hours are spent in flight. One European species of swift is even thought to sleep on the wing. Their tiny feet are unsuited to perching, so they normally rest by clinging to vertical surfaces. Swifts have very short tails and long, narrow wings. Originally, the chimney swift nested in hollow trees, but having learned to nest in chimneys, it found ready-made nesting sites and adapted quickly to their urban lifestyle. Cigar-shaped and sooty gray, the chimney swift flies with very rapid, stiff wing beats, giving loud, chippering call notes. The chimney swift is common in summer throughout the east, and occasionally summers as far west as California. The winter range is poorly known, but seems to be centered on the Amazon basin in South America. Very similar to the chimney swift and replacing it in the far west, Vaux's swift is slightly smaller and shorter-winged and slightly paler on the throat. It has a softer voice as well, with a wheezing quality. Vaux's swifts do not usually nest in chimneys, so they have not benefited from man's presence as the chimney swifts have. Present all year in parts of the American tropics, Vaux's swift enters western North America only in summer. The white-throated is our largest and most smartly patterned swift. It is found throughout most of the West and is especially numerous in canyon country. It might be mistaken for the violet-green swallow, another aerial feeder, but the swallow has shorter wings, slower flight, and pure white underparts. White-throated swifts usually nest in crevices in vertical rock, especially in high cliffs, but they may forage many miles away from these sites. Unlike the other swifts, the white-throated swift remains throughout the winter in the warmer parts of the Southwest. The smallest birds in the world, and perhaps the most remarkable, the hummingbirds are tiny nectar feeders with boundless energy that can hover motionless or fly up, down, or backwards with ease. Adapted for feeding at flowers, these birds will also come to special feeders filled with sugar and clear water. Most hummingbirds have iridescent colors, and the males of many species have a brilliantly colored gorget, or throat patch. Hummingbirds are primarily tropical. In North America, most species are found in the southwest, near the Mexican border. Any hummingbird seen in eastern North America is almost certain to be the ruby-throated. The adult male earns the name of the species. His gorget is black until the sun catches the ruby-red iridescence. Females and immatures lack the gorget and have white spots in the tail. Although they are found throughout the East in summer, ruby-throated hummingbirds leave North America almost entirely in winter, migrating to Mexico or beyond. A western species, the male black-chinned hummingbird is quite similar to the male ruby-throated, except that his gorget features an iridescent purple band below a black area on the chin. Females and immatures are nearly identical to the female ruby-throated. However, these two species rarely overlap in range. Compared to other female hummingbirds in the West, the black-chinned may be known by her small and plain look, notably long bill, frequent tail wagging while hovering, and soft call note. In many lowland areas of the West, the black-chinned is the most common hummingbird in summer, but it disappears in winter. On the Pacific coast, the brilliant rose-red crown and throat of the male Anna's hummingbird make it unique. The female is less distinctive. She is similar to the female black-chinned, but has a different call note, a metallic chipping sound, and usually hovers without much tail movement. Anna's is one of the few North American hummingbirds with well-developed song, a wheezy series accented by a loud double note, and males will sing repeatedly from an exposed perch. This bird seems better adapted to cold weather than most hummingbirds and is found all year throughout most of its range. In the mountain meadows of the Rockies, the male broad-tailed is betrayed by the loud metallic trilling of his wings. He looks deep green on the upper parts and pale green on the sides, with a rose-red throat. The female lacks the red gorget and has a buffy wash on the sides and rufous at the base of the tail. The broad-tailed is the most common nesting hummingbird in many mountain areas of the Great Basin and the Rockies, but it does not normally reach the Pacific seaboard. The male rufous hummingbird shines bright copper on the back like a new penny and has a flaming orange-red gorget. Females and young birds are golden green above and speckled on the throat with touches of reddish-brown in the plumage. Although it is one of the smaller hummingbirds, the rufous can be quite aggressive, chasing larger species away from its favored flower patch or feeder. In early spring, when the mountains are still covered with snow, rufous hummingbirds migrate north along the Pacific coast. In late summer, their southward migration takes them through the mountains. Very small numbers of this and other western hummingbirds may winter along the Gulf Coast. Very similar to the rufous hummingbird, the male Allen's differs in having the center of the back bright green instead of rufous. Females and the young of the two species are identical in the field. Allen's hummingbird is a very early migrant, moving north along the coast in February and heading south in July. However, one population on California's Channel Islands and locally around Los Angeles is present all year. North America's smallest bird is the calliope hummingbird, known by its very short tail, which it often holds up while hovering, and its very short bill. The female has a pale buffy wash on the underparts and fine speckles on the throat. The male's throat has flaring stripes of red and white. Nesting mainly in the mountains of the northwestern interior, the calliope hummingbird is an uncommon migrant through the other mountain areas of the West and is usually outnumbered by the rufous hummingbird. Other hummingbirds migrate through the desert, but Costa's hummingbird favors the desert all year. A relatively small and short-tailed hummingbird, the male Costa's is marked with a bright purple crown and a bright purple gorget that flares back to a point on each side of the neck. It has a distinctive song consisting of a very thin, high-pitched whistle. The female is plain and pale, without rufous tones. It differs from the female Anna's by its habit of flipping its tail constantly while hovering, and differs from the female black-chinned by its light, ticking call note. Restricted to the southwest, Costa's hummingbird is found all year in warmer desert regions and on the southern California coast. One of our largest hummingbirds, the blue-throated, is found only near the Mexican border. The blue on its throat is limited and difficult to see. The bird is more easily recognized by the white stripes on its face and by the big white patches in the corners of its broad, blue-black tail. Even in its limited U.S. range, the blue-throated hummingbird is very local, favoring shaded mountain canyons with running water. Another large southwestern hummingbird, the magnificent, is more widespread, occurring in dry pine oak woods as well as shady canyons. The male is very dark, with iridescence of purple on the crown and green on the throat. The female is grayish on the underparts, like the female blue-throated, but has a less contrasting tail pattern, dull gray-green with small white corners, not blue-black with large white corners. Although common only in southern Arizona, magnificent hummingbirds may show up in summer as far north as Colorado. Trogons are sluggish, colorful birds found in the tropics around the world. The elegant trogon reaches us only in southern Arizona, where it is locally common in summer in a few mountain canyons. The male elegant trogon is green above and red below, with a white bar across the chest and white patterning on the underside of the tail. The female has brown in place of green and has a white teardrop spot on the face. They nest in cavities in trees, usually choosing sycamores in Arizona. Designed perfectly for a life of pounding on trees, woodpeckers have strong toes for grasping the bark, stiff tail feathers with which to prop themselves up, and chisel-like bills. Most woodpeckers feed on insects that live just below the bark, and by keeping these insects in check, they help to protect the trees. To advertise their territories in spring, male woodpeckers often drum loudly with their bills on dead limbs. For nesting, they excavate holes in dead tree trunks or limbs, and these cavities later serve as natural birdhouses for other birds. Almost all of our woodpeckers show some red on the head, but this is the only one in the east with an entirely red head. Males and females are patterned exactly alike, with a bright red hood and large white patches in the black wings. Young birds are brown on the head, back, and wings, but may be recognized by their white underparts and white wing patches. Colonies of red-headed woodpeckers are found nesting in open, park-like woodlands. Their nesting sites are sometimes taken over by the introduced European starling, so red-headeds have become scarce over much of their range. In winter, flocks of red-headeds can be found in groves of oak. Don't look for the red belly as a major field mark for the red-bellied woodpecker. It is much easier to see this bird's zebra-barred back, pale tan face and underparts, and bright red stripe up the nape. In males, the red stripe extends forward well over the crown. The red-bellied is common in woodlands in the southeastern states and seems to be gradually extending its range northward. Like some other woodpeckers, The red-bellied will often come to backyard bird feeders for suet, cracked corn, or large seeds. Replacing the red-bellied in central and southern Texas is the golden-fronted woodpecker. It usually inhabits somewhat drier and more open woodlands. Very similar to the red-bellied woodpecker, the golden-fronted has golden yellow patches on the forehead and nape. The male shows a spot of red on the crown. In desert regions of the southwest, the Gila woodpecker may nest in the giant saguaro cactus or in tall trees along rivers. It is a plainer bird than the red-bellied woodpecker. The male has a small red cap, but the female's head is entirely pale brown. Our most widespread woodpecker, the northern flicker, is also the most variable, found in 3 distinct forms that were once considered separate species. All can be recognized as flickers by the overall brown look, spotted underparts, white rump, and flash of color under the wings and tail in flight. The yellow-shafted form is the eastern type, extending westward to Alaska across the Arctic slope in summer. In this form, the wing linings are tinged with bright yellow, and the back of the head is marked with a red crescent. Males have a black whisker mark. The red-shafted form is the flicker of the west, spreading into the southwestern lowlands and eastward on the Great Plains in winter. It has reddish wing linings, and the male has a red whisker mark, but there is no red on the nape. Yellow-shafted and red-shafted flickers often interbreed on the western plains, producing young that look intermediate between those forms. Found locally in the Arizona desert is a bird that looks like an intermediate, the so-called gilded form. It has yellow wing linings, like the yellow-shafted flicker, but it lacks the red crescent on the nape, and males have red whisker marks. Flickers are seen on the ground more often than most woodpeckers. They are among the few birds that relish ants. Bizarre feeding behavior sets the yellow-bellied sapsucker apart from most woodpeckers. The bird will drill neat rows of holes through the bark of a tree, then return periodically to drink the sap that has accumulated and to eat the insects attracted to the sap. The male yellow-bellied sapsucker has a red throat surrounded by black. The female's throat patch is white. Young birds are mostly brown-headed, but have the same long white wing stripe as the adults. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is more migratory than most of our woodpeckers. 2 close relatives of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, replacing it in the west, are the red-naped and red-breasted sapsuckers. The red-naped is almost identical to the yellow-bellied, but has a red strip on the upper nape and a broader red area on the throat. On females, the throat is half white and half red instead of all white. The red-naped sapsucker is found in the Rocky Mountains, the Great Basin, and the Southwest. Along the Pacific seaboard, this complex is represented by the red-breasted sapsucker. The head is entirely red. It might suggest the red-headed woodpecker of the east, but the underparts are deep yellow, not white. Similar to the other sapsuckers in habits, but very different in appearance, Williamson's sapsucker is restricted to the mountain west. Males are mostly black, with touches of white, yellow, and red. Females are strikingly different. With their brown heads and barred backs, they hardly suggest the other sapsuckers, but they usually have a touch of black on the chest and yellow on the belly. Williamson sapsuckers usually nest in open groves of aspen. Even in winter, they are usually found in the mountains, although they move southward somewhat at that season. Although common in some places, the three-toed woodpecker is not familiar to most birdwatchers because it lives mostly in forests of the far north or in the mountains of the west. It is recognized by the irregular white stripe down the back, the barring on the sides, and the yellow crown spot on males. Three-toads often move into an area after a forest fire to feed on beetle larvae just under the bark of dead trees, systematically chipping the bark away to find these insects. Our smallest woodpecker, the downy, is also one of the best known. It often lives in suburban areas where there are few large trees and comes readily to suet feeders. Widespread throughout North America, the downy woodpecker does not quite reach the Mexican border. The male has a red patch on the nape, while the female is entirely black and white. The monochrome pattern and the broad stripe down the back separate the downy from all other woodpeckers except the larger hairy woodpecker. In pattern, the hairy woodpecker is almost identical to the downy. The outer tail feathers are unmarked white in the hairy woodpecker and crossed by small black bars in the downy. It is easier to recognize the hairy by its large size and especially by its much larger bill. The hairy woodpecker requires slightly larger trees than the downy, so it is less often seen in suburban parks and yards. The hairy is the less common of the two over much of the east, but is more common than the downy in some parts of the west. A dry country replacement for the downy is the ladder-backed woodpecker, common over much of the southwest. Unlike the downy or hairy woodpeckers, it has narrow barring of black and white on the back. The male has a red patch on the back of the head, lacking in females. Often foraging in small mesquite trees, in certain types of cactus, or even in low bushes, the ladderback is able to live in open country that supports no other woodpeckers. Only in California will you find Nuttall's woodpecker. It is quite similar to the ladderback, but has more extensive black on the face and neck and wider black bars on the back. The two species are more easily separated by habit and range. Nuttall's avoids deserts and is most common in oak woodlands and riverside trees along the Pacific coast. Another specialty of the far west is the white-headed woodpecker, found only in mountain pine forests. It is all black except for its white head and a white patch in each wing. The male has a small red patch on the nape. The white-headed woodpecker feeds on insects and on pine seeds, often clambering about in the outer twigs to reach the pine cones. Sociable and noisy, the acorn woodpecker is almost always found in groups, in oak trees. A clan may create its own storehouse for acorns by riddling a dead tree with holes, then stuffing an acorn into each for use in winter. Like other woodpeckers, they feed mainly on wood-boring insects much of the year and may be seen hawking insects from an exposed perch. The acorn woodpecker is found only in the west, although it also has local populations as far south as northern South America. Our most uniformly dark woodpecker, unmistakable in color, Lewis's woodpecker wears a combination of gray, pink, and glossy greenish black. In flight it looks dark and crow-like. It is an uncommon and local resident of open groves of trees in the west, where it was first discovered by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Unmistakable, even in flight, the pileated woodpecker is much larger than our other species and is mostly black, with white wing linings and a fiery red crest. Often rather shy, it requires stands of big trees where it digs in deadwood for insect larvae. Rectangular or oblong diggings are signs that the pileated has been at work. Although widespread, the pileated woodpecker is most common in swamplands of the southeast, the same areas that once provided a home for the even larger ivory-billed woodpecker, probably now extinct in the United States. Members of the flycatcher family are mostly solitary birds that wait on exposed perches and fly out to capture passing insects. Many of the flycatchers are drab in color and are most easily recognized by voice. Although they look deceptively peaceful when at rest, the flycatchers known as kingbirds are fearless in defense of their territories. They will fly out to attack hawks, crows, and other large birds that venture too near, readily driving these predators away. East of the Great Plains, the only widespread member of this group is the eastern kingbird. It wears a clean-cut black and white pattern with a distinctive broad white band on the tip of the tail. In addition to its eastern range, the eastern kingbird is also found locally inland in the west in summer. Another fearless flycatcher of towns and open country, the western kingbird is patterned in gray and yellow. Its tail is black with a narrow white outer edge. Seemingly undisturbed by human activity, it may build its nest on a power pole on a busy street. Its bickering or sputtering song may be heard very early in the morning, before first light. Like most flycatchers, the western kingbird is mostly a summer resident in North America, but a few turn up in southern Florida every winter. Similar to the western kingbird, but with a more limited range, is Cassin's kingbird. This bird is darker gray on the head and chest, setting off the white chin, and it lacks the white outer edge on the tail. Cassin's kingbird is often found in more wooded areas at higher elevations than the western kingbird, although the two birds are sometimes found nesting in the same grove of trees. The harsh, low-pitched voice of Cassin's kingbird may be its best field mark in such cases. Found locally in the southeast, mostly in Florida, is the gray kingbird. It is gray-backed, has no white band on the tail, and sports a very heavy bill. The gray kingbird is often seen along roadsides and even nests in some of Florida's larger cities. The state bird of Oklahoma, the scissor-tailed flycatcher, is one of the most dramatic summer birds of the southern Great Plains. Perched on a fence or treetop in open country, it is recognized by its streaming black tail, pearly gray and white body, and touch of pink on the sides. When it flies, it flashes bright carmine under the wings. Related to the kingbirds, the scissortail is equally fearless in driving predators from its nest. Summering on the southern plains, most scissortails migrate to Central America in fall, but a few winter in southern Florida. In the east, the great crested flycatcher can be recognized by the bright yellow belly, bushy-headed look, and touches of rufous in the wings and tail. It is the size of a kingbird, but unlike the kingbirds, it tends to remain hidden in forested areas, being detected most often by its loud whistled calls. It builds its nest in tree cavities or sometimes in birdhouses. Common in summer throughout eastern North America, the great crested flycatcher winters mostly in the tropics. A western replacement for the great crested, the ash-throated flycatcher generally looks paler and more washed out, with a much lighter throat. It is found in a variety of western habitats, including open desert. Ash-throated flycatchers are widespread in summer, but in winter, most withdraw into Mexico. Named Phoebe for its call, this flycatcher has few obvious markings, but it is recognized by its gentle tail-dipping motion while perched. Phoebes often build their nests under bridges or on the rafters of buildings. In the northeast, the eastern phoebe is one of the earlier songbird migrants to arrive in spring. Widespread in summer, it is the only flycatcher that commonly spends the winter in the southeastern United States. In California and the Southwest, few birds are so typical of lowland rivers as the black phoebe. It is usually seen perched near the water's edge, giving its sharp call notes and sallying out to catch flying insects. The black phoebe makes only a limited migration and it can be found all year in most of its favored haunts. A phoebe decorated in earth tones is Say's phoebe, found in dry country throughout the West. It often builds its nest on the porch of a ranch house on the prairies. Brownish gray above and pale cinnamon below, it can be recognized as a phoebe by its gentle tail dipping when perched. Where it can find suitable open country, Say's phoebe will summer as far north as Alaska. Although it is drab and very plain in appearance, the western wood pewee is among the best known summer birds in many wooded areas of the West. Its nasal song can be heard throughout the season, even on hot days when other birds are silent. When it stops singing, however, it becomes just a small grayish flycatcher without distinctive markings. The summer range of the western wood pewee covers half the continent. It winters in the tropics. Plaintive whistles in the woods indicate that the eastern wood pewee is in residence. This small plain flycatcher is usually somewhat paler underneath than the western wood pewee, but voice is always its best field mark. The eastern wood pewee can be found in summer as far west as wooded river valleys on the Great Plains. Large-headed and short-tailed, the olive-sided flycatcher is usually found perched bolt upright on a dead branch at the very top of a tree, waiting to fly out after passing insects. It appears to wear an open vest with dark gray sides separated by a strip of white. Although it is widespread in summer in coniferous forest, it is uncommon in many parts of its range. Where it occurs, however, the olive-sided flycatcher advertises its presence with an emphatic whistled, "Quick 3 beers." Sometimes considered the bane of birdwatchers are the small flycatchers of the genus Empedonax. There are 10 species of Empedonax in North America, and all are small birds with pale eye rings and wing bars. They are all so similar that even experts cannot tell them apart except by voice. In the East, one of the most common Empedonax is the least flycatcher. Found in open woods, it is best recognized by its snappy Chebec song. Most common in the Northeast, the least flycatcher is also found in summer west across much of Canada. The most widespread Empedonax in the southeastern states is the Acadian flycatcher. Common in swampy woodlands, it may be detected by its sharp call notes and song. Although the Acadian flycatcher is slightly larger and greener than most other Empedonax, visual differences are usually not apparent. Common over much of the West in summer is the well-named western flycatcher. Compared to other Empedonax in its range, it tends to look more yellow on the underparts, especially on the throat, although conditions of lighting can make these colors difficult to judge. The western flycatcher spends the summer in coniferous forest, but it may be found in other habitats during migration. Streamsides in desert regions provide a haven for the vermilion flycatcher. Most flycatchers are rather plain, but the male vermilion is a striking exception, decked in black and flaming red. To add to his charms, he has a display in which he puffs himself up like a ball and flutters slowly through the air, singing in flight. The object of his attention is plainer gray and white with a hint of pink on her underparts. The vermilion flycatcher is a southwestern specialty with a more limited range in winter. Autumn strays may show up farther afield. In its limited distribution in Texas, the loud, flashy great kiskadee is unmistakable by sight or sound. This big flycatcher is often found near water. where it may plunge for small fish as well as sallying out after large insects. Widespread in the tropics, the great kiskadee has recently been expanding its South Texas range. Although the lark family is well represented in the Old World, only one species is widespread in North America. Our horned lark is a bird of open ground, often found on plowed fields or on the short grass of airports. The pattern of black on its face and chest makes a better field mark than the tiny black horns on its head. Abundant on the Great Plains and common in parts of the north and west, the horned lark is less common toward the southeast. Swallows are graceful flyers that do almost all their feeding on the wing. They are often seen circling low over ponds and rivers in search of flying insects. Many swallows are quite sociable, nesting in colonies and traveling in large flocks. This is our only swallow that is truly swallow-tailed. Its tail is long and deeply forked, with white patches at the base, although it may simply look long and pointed in flight. The barn swallow scoops up pellets of mud in its bill and uses them to build its nest, plastered under the shelter of a barn, a bridge, or some other man-made structure. Found practically throughout North America in summer, the barn swallow winters in the tropics. Snowy white below and steel blue or green above, the tree swallow is recognized by its simple bicolored pattern. It normally nests in holes in trees, but it will readily accept birdhouses, including those put out for bluebirds. Widespread throughout the northern and central parts of the continent in summer, this is also the swallow most likely to be seen in winter. Concentrations in the thousands are seen in fall on the Atlantic coast and in winter in Florida. Strictly a western bird, the violet green swallow summers from Mexico to Alaska, but winters mostly south of the United States. It is sharply bicolored, like the tree swallow, but has more white on the face and a white patch on either side of the rump. The cavity it chooses for nesting may be in a tree, in rocks, or in a giant cactus. A brown-backed swallow with a white throat and a narrow dark band across the chest is the bank swallow. For nesting, these birds dig horizontal tunnels in vertical dirt banks, usually close to water. The cliff swallow has a square-tipped tail, a dark chestnut throat, and usually a pale forehead, but it is best recognized by the pale buffy patch on the rump. This is the master architect among swallows, using mud to build a nest shaped like a jug or gourd with a narrow entrance. In former times, the colonies were placed under overhangs on cliffs, but now they are usually on buildings or under bridges. The increase in nesting sites has allowed the cliff swallow to become much more common in some parts of its range. At one time, it nested only in a few southwestern caves, but now that the cave swallow has learned to nest under bridges and in culverts, it is expanding its range. Like the cliff swallow, the cave swallow has a buffy rump patch, but its throat is also pale buff, not dark chestnut. Summering over much of Texas and north to Carlsbad Caverns, the cave swallow has also nested recently in Florida and Arizona. In the east, no other wild bird has accepted human hospitality so thoroughly as the purple martin. Most of its eastern colonies today are in multi-roomed martin houses. The return of the purple martins is one of the first signs of spring in many eastern states. In the west, most martins still nest in cavities in trees or giant cactus. This is our largest swallow. The female is pale gray to white on the forehead and underparts, while the male purple martin is glossy purplish black all over. A family that includes the jays, crows, ravens, and magpies, members of the Corvidae, are often referred to collectively as corvids. Although they are diverse in color and shape, most corvids have loud, harsh voices and omnivorous feeding habits. They are often seen in flocks. A flashy, noisy bird, the blue jay is impossible to overlook. Other kinds of jays have blue in the plumage, but this one is known by its crest, black neckband, and pattern of white in the wings and tail. The blue jay has varied tastes and comes to bird feeders for sunflower seeds, peanuts, and suet. Some of its call notes are musical, but its harsh alarm calls may serve to warn other birds of approaching danger. Southward flights of blue jays may be conspicuous in fall, but at least a few birds winter in northern parts of its range. Steller's jay, a dark blue and black resident of coastal and montane forest, replaces the blue jay over much of the west. It is a common visitor to some picnic grounds and campsites where it may hunt for leftovers. Its typical call notes are more low-pitched and rough than those of the blue jay. Like most other jays, Steller's is a permanent resident, rarely wandering far from its nesting grounds. A common gray and blue jay without a crest is the scrub jay, known by its whitish throat and faint necklace of streaks. The scrub jay is partial to acorns, so it is usually found near oak trees. But within its range, it will also come to backyard bird feeders for seeds. Common in parts of the west and southwest, the scrub jay is also found locally in central Florida. In canyons near the Mexican border, roving bands of gray-breasted jays are common in the woodlands of pine and oak. This is a heavier-looking bird than the scrub jay and more uniformly colored, blue-gray above, pale gray below. The young have yellow or pink on the bill. The gray-breasted jay is found in flocks at all seasons, and even nesting is a social activity, with all the adults in a colony helping to feed the young. Resident in Arizona and southwestern New Mexico, the gray-breasted jay also reaches the Big Bend area of Texas. Around campsites and picnic grounds in the far north, the gray jay often comes in search of handouts. Its bold behavior and its partial black mask sometimes earn it the affectionate nickname of camp robber. As a young bird, it is dark charcoal gray all over and looks very different from the adult. The gray jay is widespread in the far north and in high mountains of the west. The green jay is a tropical bird, and it has a distinctly tropical appearance. It wears a gaudy pattern of green, purple, and black with a flash of yellow in the tail. In North America, it has a limited range, but it is common in some woodlots near the Mexican border. Its range in southern Texas has increased somewhat in recent years. The crow-shaped Clark's nutcracker is pale gray with a striking black and white pattern in the wings and tail. Living in pine woodlands of the west, it uses its long bill to extract the seeds from pine cones. In fall, it buries little piles of seeds in the ground. During winter, it is able to relocate these seeds for a reliable food source. A permanent resident in mountain pine forest, Clark's nutcracker rarely wanders into the lowlands. In open country with scattered trees in the west, magpies are often among the most noticeable of birds. Their long tails and striking black and white patterns make them unmistakable even in flight. This species, the yellow-billed magpie, is a California specialty, recognized by its bright yellow bill and yellow spot near the eye. Widespread in the central valleys of California, it has never been found outside the state boundaries. The common magpie over most of the West, as far north as Alaska, is the black-billed magpie. It lacks the bright bill color of its California relative, and it is somewhat larger, but the striking pattern of its plumage is the same. Its bulky stick nest is often found in the trees along rivers in grassland country. The ragged scarecrow in the farmer's field is disappearing from the American landscape, but the crow is still as common as ever in open countryside. Some other birds are all black in color, including starlings and grackles, but the crow is much larger than most of these. Compared to other crows and ravens, the American crow is most easily recognized by voice. Crows are often found in noisy flocks, especially in winter, when large numbers may gather to spend the night in a communal roost. Almost identical to the American crow, but slightly smaller, the fish crow is almost always found near water. Its best field mark is its voice, a nasal call that often sounds two-syllabled. However, young American crows in summer can make a sound that is very similar. Primarily a bird of the coast, the fish crow also extends far inland along major river systems. Famed for its role in superstition, the common raven is widespread in the wilder parts of North America. It looks like a giant crow with a heavy bill and wedge-shaped tail. It may be mistaken for a hawk when seen soaring overhead. Even in areas where they are numerous, common ravens are usually found only in pairs, not in flocks, and they usually place their nests on remote cliffs. Common ravens inhabit a variety of wild areas, from deserts to Arctic tundra. Grasslands of the Southwest are the home of the Chihuahuan raven, a small version of the common raven. It has a hidden patch of white at the base of the neck, but this is rarely seen. The Chihuahuan raven is more easily recognized by its habitat and its flat, croaking call notes. In winter, it often gathers in large flocks. In areas where common and Chihuahuan ravens both occur, the Chihuahuan is usually on open plains, away from the mountains. Short on color, but long on personality, the chickadees and titmice are small, active, acrobatic birds that search for insects around the branches and twigs of trees. Rather tame birds, they are often attracted to backyard bird feeders. They nest in holes in trees or in birdhouses. The contrasting dark bib and cap and the busybody personality are the marks of the chickadees. There are several species of chickadees found in different parts of North America. The Carolina chickadee is the only one in the southeastern states where it is common in woodlands and shaded yards. Its fussing call notes, sounding almost like the word chickadee, can be heard at all seasons, but its whistled song of 4 notes is most frequent in late winter and spring. The Carolina chickadee is a permanent resident in the east and southeast, from Philadelphia to St. Louis and southward. Visually, it is almost identical to the Carolina chickadee, but the black-capped usually sings a song of 2 notes, not 4. It is also a bit larger and shows a little more white in the wings. But range is the best distinction because the two rarely overlap. Common in the northeast, north of the range of the Carolina chickadee, the black-capped is also widespread in the west, mostly in deciduous groves. Similar to other chickadees in general pattern, but sporting a jaunty white stripe over the eye, the mountain chickadee is common in coniferous forests of western North America. Its whistled song and fussing call notes are recognizably similar to those of other chickadees. The mountain chickadee is mostly a permanent resident at upper elevations, but it occasionally wanders into the lowlands in winter. Along the Pacific coast and locally inland in the northwest lives the chestnut-backed chickadee. It is found exclusively in humid coniferous forest. The most colorful member of this group, it has a dark chocolate brown cap and a chestnut back. Its sides may be either gray or rufous. Its voice is a husky version of the familiar chickadee call. In the taller trees of canyons and valleys of the southwest, a bird that sounds like a chickadee is likely to be the bridled titmouse. With a white stripe over the eye, it might be mistaken for a mountain chickadee at first, but the bridled titmouse has a more complicated face pattern and a pointed gray crest outlined in black. Widespread south of the border, the bridled titmouse reaches the U.S. only in Arizona and western New Mexico. With its perky crest and wide-eyed expression, the little tufted titmouse is a favorite visitor to bird feeders in the east. Mostly mouse gray and white, it has a black forehead spot and a touch of rufous on the sides below the wings. Titmice often travel with chickadees in flocks in winter, exploring the larger branches while the chickadees work the outer twigs. A form of this bird found in South Texas has a white forehead and black crest, and is sometimes called the black-crested titmouse. One of the plainest birds in the West, the plain titmouse has no distinguishing marks aside from a small pointed crest, but it has the same colorful personality as other members of the family. It gives a wide variety of calls, including some that are much like those of chickadees. Although it is uncommon and local in some parts of the Southwest, the plain titmouse is a common bird of parks and yards along the California coast. The smallest songbird in the desert is the verdin, a distant relative of the chickadee family. Verdins are mostly gray, but the adult has a yellow head and a tiny spot of rufous on the shoulder. Immatures are drab all over. Besides eating small insects, verdins often visit flowers in the desert to feed on nectar. Common in desert areas where the remains of its globular nests may be found in practically every mesquite tree, the verdin is scarce toward the northern limits of its range. The bush tit has practically no distinguishing markings, so it may be difficult to recognize on the rare occasions when it sits still. Usually, however, a flock of bush tits may be known by their hyperactive behavior, rather long tails, and constant ticking or twittering notes while they forage. For nesting, bush tits weave a complex hanging bag with an entrance tube on the side. A bird of open woods and chaparral, the bush tit is often found in residential areas along the Pacific coast. Nuthatches are agile climbing birds, living on the trunks and branches of trees where they are able to walk down head first as well as scurrying up or around the limbs. They feed on insects in the bark and build their nests in cavities in the trees. Our largest member of this family, and the only one that is common in deciduous woodlands, is the white-breasted nuthatch. It is recognized by its white face surrounding a beady black eye and by its loud nasal call notes. In winter, traveling with flocks of chickadees and other birds, this nuthatch may visit bird feeders for suet or sunflower seeds. Although it is rare in the far north, the white-breasted nuthatch is widespread and common across the lower 48 states. A small nuthatch of the conifers, the red-breasted nuthatch is not always noticeably red on the underparts. A better field mark is the face pattern, with a black stripe through the eye and a conspicuous white eyebrow. Summering mostly in the north and in high mountains in the west, this nuthatch is more widespread in winter, but it usually seeks groves of coniferous trees. In open pine woodlands of the south, noisy groups of little brown-headed nuthatches clamber about like acrobats on the branches, frequently hanging upside down. Although they are often high in the trees, their squeaky call notes betray their presence. Natural cavities or old woodpecker holes provide their usual nest sites, but a pair will sometimes accept a birdhouse as a substitute. A permanent resident in the southeast, the brown-headed nuthatch reaches its northern limit in Delaware. Almost identical to the brown-headed nuthatch, but with a slightly grayer cap and different call notes, the pygmy nuthatch is most easily recognized by range. It is found only in the west. The pygmy nuthatch favors woodlands of pine, especially yellow pine, and is almost never found away from them. No bird has a closer relationship with tree bark than the brown creeper. It spends its life creeping methodically up one tree, then flying down to the base of another to start its upward spiral once again. For camouflage, the brown creeper is patterned like bark. It even hides its nest under a hanging strip of loose bark against a tree trunk. The creeper spends the summer mostly in northern and mountainous areas, but it may be found over most of North America in winter. Wrens are mostly small brown birds, rather plain in appearance, but with rich, melodious voices. Most kinds feed actively in dense, low growth, where they may be difficult to see. If looks were everything, the house wren would hardly be popular. But it is a favorite backyard bird because of its rich, bubbling song and because it readily moves into birdhouses. If no birdhouse is available, it may nest in any sort of crevice. Mostly plain gray-brown, it can be recognized by its small size, thin bill, black barring on the wings and tail, and habit of holding its tail tilted up above the level of its back. Widespread in summer, the house wren winters only as far north as the southern tier of states. A dark, stub-tailed sprite of the northern woods, this wren is often difficult to observe as it creeps about in thickets and under fallen logs. When it allows a glimpse, it may suggest a house wren, but it has heavier barring on the sides and a more noticeable pale eyebrow. Its long, complex song, heard in spring and summer, is a remarkable performance. In many areas that lie south of the Canadian forest, the winter wren visits only in migration or in winter. The Carolina wren, more colorful than most of its relatives, wears bright buff below and chestnut above, set off by a white eyebrow. Living in brushy woods and backyards, it is found in pairs at all seasons. Both members of a pair may engage in a rich, frolicking song and various loud call notes. The Carolina wren is mostly a bird of the southeast. Its northern limit may change with time, since it becomes rare after especially harsh winters. Buick's wren may suggest a washed-out Carolina wren in pattern, but it has a long tail with a bit of white at the corners, and it often flips the tail about expressively as it hops through the undergrowth. The song of Buick's wren varies with geography. In some places it sounds almost like a song sparrow, while in other areas it gives a simple trill. Very common in some parts of the West, Buick's wren has become a rare bird east of the Great Plains. Big and bold, with a gravelly voice, the cactus wren hardly seems typical of the wren family. It is one of the most conspicuous birds of the southwestern deserts. Building its bulky nest of sticks in the protection of a cholla cactus, the wren is able to slip in among the thorny branches with ease. The cactus wren is a permanent resident wherever it occurs, and a pair may defend their territory all year. The rock wren is able to make a living in many arid zones where there is practically no vegetation. It is often seen scurrying down a dry wash or perched atop a boulder, bobbing up and down on its rather long legs. It builds its nest in a crevice among the rocks, often laying out a sort of patio of small pebbles in front of the nest. Near the limits of its range or during its wanderings in migration, the rock wren may be found in the stony riprap around dam spillways. Steep-walled canyons of the west provide the perfect surroundings for the loud, echoing song of the canyon wren. Although the bird may be hard to see as it bounces among the rocks, this is one of our most colorful wrens. It has a white throat and chest contrasting with the bright rufus-brown body. Where it can find the proper habitat, the canyon wren is a permanent resident, and it may sing at any time of the year. A sputtering song from deep in the cattails announces the presence of the marsh wren. This bird is often secretive, hiding in the marsh, but it may be lured into the open by squeaking sounds. Within its wide range, the marsh wren has a very patchy distribution, and it has disappeared from many areas as marshes have been drained. Something like a cross between a wren and a duck, the dipper is a songbird with a unique lifestyle. It finds almost all of its food underwater in rushing mountain streams. Chunky, short-tailed, and dark slaty gray all over, it is likely to be seen perched on a rock in midstream. Submerging itself in the water, it walks on the creek bottom, searching for insect larvae and other small aquatic life. This is one of the few water birds that can stay throughout the winter even in northern Canada, where swift-flowing streams remain unfrozen. The kinglets and gnatcatchers are very small birds that search actively for insects in trees or shrubbery. The tiny kinglets are known by their habit of nervously flicking their wings open and shut. There is nothing kingly about them, aside from their colorful crowns. This kinglet, the golden-crowned, has black and white face stripes setting off a crown patch that is yellow in females, yellow and red in males. At all seasons, the golden-crowned kinglet is usually found in coniferous trees, where it may be hard to observe. Its high, thin calls often reveal its presence. Nesting in northern forests and in high mountains of the west, it spreads to the south in winter. A plainer bird than the golden-crowned kinglet, the ruby-crowned usually conceals its red crest. More consistent field marks are the broken eye ring and the wing-flicking habit. Ruby-crowned kinglet is usually easier to see than the golden-crowned because it will forage in low deciduous brush. Its common call note is a short scolding. Its complex song is a remarkable performance for such a small bird. Ruby-crowned kinglets can be found practically everywhere on the continent in either summer, winter, or migration. Gnatcatchers are tiny sprites with longer tails than the kinglets. The blue-gray gnatcatcher is common in woodlands, especially in the east, but it is easy to overlook when it stays high in the trees. With a good view, it is known by its blue-gray back, plain underparts, narrow white eye ring, and extensive white in the outer tail feathers. Its rather peevish song and calls are also distinctive. The blue-gray gnatcatcher is most common in the southern states. and tends to be rare toward the northern end of its range. Although it has slightly more black in the tail than other gnatcatchers, the best mark for the black-tailed gnatcatcher is its habitat in southwestern deserts. It is a permanent resident there, and it is found in pairs all year. In summer, the male develops a distinctive black cap. The thrushes, bluebirds, solitaires, and robins are mostly medium-sized songbirds that feed on berries and small fruits as well as insects. Most members of this group have very musical songs. With bright colors and gentle voices, the bluebirds are perennial favorites wherever they are found. The place to find the eastern bluebird is in semi-open country with fields and meadows for feeding and scattered trees with cavities for nesting. Competition for nest sites with the introduced European starling led to a decline in bluebird numbers during the 20th century. However, because the bluebirds will nest in birdhouses, they have been helped in many areas by ambitious bluebird trail projects. Although it is called eastern, this bluebird is also found in Mexico and locally in the southwestern states. A replacement species over much of the west is the western bluebird. It is similar to the eastern bluebird, but the male's throat is blue, not rufous, and it often has a rufous patch on the back. Its calls have a slightly harder quality than those of the eastern bluebird. The female western bluebird is much duller than the male, with only a pale wash of the blue and rufous hues. The mountain bluebird, despite its name, is not restricted to the mountains. It may be found on open prairies at all elevations, especially in the north. Searching for insects, the mountain bluebird may hover low over the grass on rapidly beating wings. The male is blue all over, somewhat paler on the underparts. Females are gray with just a hint of blue. Mountain bluebirds get as far north as northwestern Canada in summer. During the winter, they may wander well out onto the Great Plains. A trim, gray bird of the western mountains, Townsend's solitaire is usually seen perched bolt upright at the top of a small tree. At rest, its only conspicuous mark is a white eye ring, but in flight, it shows white tail edges and a buff patch in each wing. Its complicated song is not often heard. Summering as far north as Alaska, the solitaire may wander well eastward onto the plains in winter, especially where it can find groves of junipers. 5 species of brown thrushes are found in North America. All are some shade of brown above and more or less spotted on the chest. They may be difficult to observe as they search for insects on the forest floor or for berries in the trees, but all have rich and distinctive songs. Not so shy and retiring as the other brown thrushes, the wood thrush will sometimes come out in the open to forage on a lawn, and its flute-like song may be heard along shaded streets in eastern suburbs. It is more distinctly marked than its relatives, with bold black spots on the underparts and bright, foxy tones above, especially on the head. Common in summer in the eastern United States, the wood thrush winters in the tropics. A northern breeder, like most of the brown thrushes, the hermit thrush is the only one likely to be found in North America in winter. It is less strikingly marked than the wood thrush, and its upper parts are mostly dull brown, except that the tail is bright rufous. Its haunting song may be heard across the northern forest and in shady spruce groves in the mountains in summer. The brown thrush, called the veery, may be known by its pale, rufous-brown back, its very lightly spotted chest, and the rather blank expression on its face. Its breezy, spiraling song is easily recognized. Damp, deciduous thickets provide the favored summer home for the veery. Although veeries are widespread, they are much more common in the east than in the west, and migrants travel mostly through the southeastern states. Swainson's thrush is very dull brown on the upper parts, but its chest is often washed with buff, and it usually has a buffy eye ring. Although all 5 brown thrushes migrate through the east, only Swainson's and hermit are likely to be seen as migrants on the Great Plains and in the west. The song of Swainson's thrush is a series of notes tending to rise in pitch. Swainson's thrush is common in summer across the northern forest, less common in the mountains of the west. The most northerly of the brown thrushes in summer, the gray-cheeked is also the dullest in color and often the most difficult to observe. Its descending song may recall that of the veery, but it usually has a more nasal tone. Nesting in boreal forest and even at the edge of the tundra, the gray-cheeked thrush migrates through the eastern states and winters entirely in South America. One of our best-known birds is the American robin, found in parks and gardens all over the continent. Famous for its conspicuous habit of hunting earthworms on the lawn, it actually spends more time feeding on berries, wild fruit, and insects. Adults are unmistakable, but juvenile robins are heavily spotted at first and can appear confusingly different from their parents. Robins from the Arctic are highly migratory. At more temperate latitudes, robins often travel in large flocks during the winter. Although its colors may suggest a robin, the varied thrush is usually a much more elusive denizen of dense forests in the far west. It is marked by a dark band across the chest and by orange bars in the wings, conspicuous when the bird flies. Summering mainly in humid forests of the Pacific Northwest, it spreads south in winter and occasionally strays eastward. The haunting, whistled song of the varied thrush is often delivered from the topmost spire of a tall spruce. For most people, the wren tit is nothing more than a voice in the chaparral along the Pacific coast. Slipping furtively through the dense brush, it seldom allows a glimpse. When it does come out in the open, it may be known by its small size, plump brown body, long tail, and staring pale eye. Most numerous in coastal areas, the wren tit is also found in thickets in the foothills of the Sierra. The thrashers and mockingbirds, sometimes called mimic thrushes, are slim, long-tailed birds that are all accomplished songsters. They often search for insects on the ground or for berries in low shrubbery. A slim, gray bird with white patches in the wings and tail, the northern mockingbird often flashes its wings open while foraging, perhaps to startle hidden insects into moving. Famed for its imitations of other bird songs, the mockingbird may sing all night on moonlit nights in spring. During the summer, it may feed largely on berries, and a mockingbird will often stake out a berry-producing hedge as its winter territory. Most common in the south, this bird is called northern only because there are other kinds of mockingbirds in the tropics. Dense thickets are the home of the gray catbird. It can be elusive at times, but not only does it have a meowing call note, it also seems to be as curious as a cat and will often come out to investigate the observer. Its song is a disorganized jumble of notes, often with cat-like sounds thrown in. Mostly plain slaty gray with a black cap, the gray catbird shows no color aside from a patch of rufous under the tail. Although it is widespread in summer, the catbird is much more common in the east than in the west. Although it might be mistaken for a wood thrush, the brown thrasher is much longer-tailed, has stripes instead of spots on the underparts, and has yellow eyes. The thrasher is usually found lurking on the ground under dense thickets, thrashing the leaves aside with its bill in search of insects. Its song, often given from a higher exposed perch, features many doubled phrases and notes. The only thrasher found in the east, it mostly withdraws from the northern part of its range in winter. The staring orange-yellow eyes and heavy black bill give the curve-billed thrasher a rather fierce expression. These are practically its only field marks because its plumage is all gray-brown with faint spotting on the chest. The curved bill is very common in deserts of the southwest, usually building its nest among the protective spines of the cholla cactus. The bird seems to call attention to itself with its call, a loud, double-noted whistle. The curve-billed thrasher is absent from the deserts of California, but it is common from Arizona to Texas. On the Pacific coast lives the California thrasher, a big, gray-brown bird with a sickle-shaped bill and a tawny patch under the tail. Although it is often common in chaparral and even in residential neighborhoods, it may escape notice because it is usually close to the ground in dense cover, except when it is singing. Appropriately named, the California thrasher is found in the United States only in California. A thrasher of the desert grasslands, Bendire's, is very similar to its neighbor, the curve-billed thrasher, in overall appearance. However, the bill of Bendire's is relatively short and straight and pale at the base. When it begins to sing, Bendire's thrasher confirms its identity with a continuous musical warble, unlike the jerky start and stop phrases of other thrashers. Found in summer in open desert with good ground cover, it has a more restricted range in winter. Our only widespread member of the pipit family is the water pipit. A buffy brown bird that walks on the ground, it might be mistaken for a sparrow, except that it has a thin bill, and it pumps its tail up and down when it walks. In winter, it is usually found in flocks on open fields and lake shores. Water pipits nest in the Arctic and above tree line in the mountains, but they go to warmer climates in winter. The name waxwing refers to waxy red tips on certain wing feathers, rarely noticeable in the wild. More obvious is the yellow band on the tip of the tail, a mark shared by no other birds in North America. The cedar waxwing is the most familiar species. It has an elegant appearance at close range, colored in soft brown, gray, and yellow. Waxwings are sociable at all seasons, and flocks may appear unpredictably to feed on berries and small fruits. Because of its erratic wanderings, the cedar waxwing may be common in an area one year and rare the next. Even more unpredictable in its travels is the Bohemian waxwing, a bird of the north and northwest. It is larger than the cedar waxwing and often looks darker and grayer, with a chestnut patch under the tail and a pattern of yellow and white stripes in the wing. Slim, crested birds of the southwest, phainopeplas, feed heavily upon berries. Mistletoe berries are a staple of their diet, and these birds may play a major role in moving mistletoe seeds from one tree to another in the desert. Males are glossy black, with a white wing patch that is mostly concealed at rest. Females are more softly colored in gray. They are found at all seasons in most parts of their range, but their numbers may vary from month to month. The predators of the songbird clan, shrikes, are marked by the hook-tipped bill and black mask. They feed mostly on insects, but they will also catch rodents, and even small birds, sometimes impaling their prey on a thorn. Any shrike seen south of central Canada in summer is the loggerhead shrike. It might be mistaken for a mockingbird at first, but notice the mask and the black in the wings and tail. In recent years, the loggerhead shrike has become quite rare in the Northeast, but it is still common in parts of the West. Nesting in the far north, the northern shrike is known to most observers only as a winter visitor. It is rare toward the southern limits of its range. The northern is very similar to the loggerhead shrike, but it is slightly larger, with a heavier bill, and may show fine barring. Its black mask may appear constricted in front of the eye. The immature northern shrike is more easily distinguished by its brownish tones and barred underparts. Vireos are small to medium-sized birds that search for insects on leaves and twigs among heavy foliage. Most vireos are rather plain in color and methodical in their movements. They are difficult to see at times, but all have distinctive songs. While many vireos are treetop birds, the white-eyed is a shy denizen of the thickets. Its snappy, jumbled song is heard far more often than the bird is seen. When it does come out in the open, it is recognized by its two white wing bars, yellow wash on the sides, yellow eye ring, and staring white eyes. It also tends to move about more actively than most other vireos. Widespread in the eastern states in summer, the white-eyed vireo is most common in the south, where it may be found all year. White throat, white wing bars, and contrasting white spectacles around the eyes are the marks of the solitary vireo. Its overall color varies with geography. In the west, it is quite gray, but eastern birds are olive on the back and washed with yellow on the sides. The solitary vireo usually forages along the limbs and larger branches in trees, often singing as it goes. It is a common summer resident in mixed woods and may remain throughout the winter in the southern states. In oak woodlands of the eastern United States, the yellow-throated vireo is a common summer resident. More colorful than most of its relatives, it has white wing bars, bold spectacles around its eyes, and a bright yellow throat. The deliberate phrases of its song have a rich, husky quality. The yellow-throated vireo is primarily a southern bird, and its summer range barely reaches southern Canada. One of the smaller and more active members of its family, Hutton's vireo, may sometimes be confused with the ruby-crowned kinglet, but it has the slightly thicker bill typical of vireos. It is a bird of oak woodland in the southwest and along the Pacific coast. Its song is a rather uninspired repetition of a simple rising or falling note. Most vireos are migratory, but Hutton's is a permanent resident throughout its range. One of the most numerous birds in summer in eastern North America, the red-eyed vireo, is not often seen because it keeps to the tops of forest trees. Its monotonous song of short phrases gives it away. The red eyes of this vireo are not noticeable at a distance. A better field mark is the face pattern, with a gray crown and a narrow black outline to the white eyebrow stripe. Although the summer range of the red-eyed vireo extends far to the northwest, its migration is mostly through the eastern states, and it winters in South America. Passing through Philadelphia only in migration, the Philadelphia vireo is found mostly in eastern Canada in summer. Its song is much like that of the red-eyed vireo, but this bird is smaller with a shorter bill and a less contrasting head pattern. The throat and chest are washed with creamy yellow. The Philadelphia vireo is usually an uncommon bird in most areas. One of the plainest of the vireos, marked only by a whitish eyebrow, the warbling vireo is most easily known by its rich, warbling song. It is a common summer resident in deciduous woodlands over much of North America. Like other members of its family, the warbling vireo will sing throughout the day in summer, sometimes even while sitting on its nest. Widespread in summer and in migration, the warbling vireo is rare only in the far north and in some parts of the southeast. The American warblers are sometimes called the butterflies of the bird world. They are small and active, and most kinds are brightly colored. Many warblers spend the winter in the tropics and migrate north to the Canadian forest for the summer. During their spring migration through eastern North America, it may be possible to see 20 species of colorful warblers in one day. Recognizing them in their fall migration can be more challenging, since many warblers change to a dull plumage before they start southward. One of the most common and widespread members of the family is the yellow warbler. It is found in summer across most of North America, favoring open woods, especially willow groves near water. Bright yellow all over, slightly darker on the back, the male yellow warbler has thin red stripes on the chest. Females are duller, without obvious markings, and no other warbler is so uniformly pale greenish yellow. Found from the Mexican border to the Arctic in summer, the yellow warbler rarely winters in North America, except on the Florida Keys. Despite being named for a southern flower, the magnolia warbler spends the summer in northern forest, like most of its relatives. It is patterned mostly in yellow and black, with black stripes on the sides, blue-gray on the crown, and white patches in the wings and tail. Females and fall-plumaged birds are paler and duller. Most show some dark stripes on the sides below the wings. Nesting in the northeast, the magnolia warbler migrates through the eastern states and winters mostly in Mexico and Central America. With a chestnut patch on the face and heavy striping of black and yellow on the underparts, the male Cape May warbler in breeding plumage is a distinctive bird. Spruce forest of the north is its favorite habitat in summer. Female Cape Mays and birds in fall plumage can be much duller, but they are marked by the extensive narrow streaking on the underparts. Wintering in the Caribbean region, the Cape May warbler migrates mostly along the Atlantic coast and is rare west of the Mississippi. While most of its relatives go to the tropics in winter, the yellow-rumped warbler spends the winter mainly in North America. During the cold months, it is abundant in coastal thickets of wax myrtle, and it will sometimes come to bird feeders as well. It is patterned with brown in winter, or with gray and black in summer, with accents of yellow on the sides and rump. The eastern form, often called myrtle warbler, has a white throat. The western form, known as Audubon's warbler, has a yellow throat. In its different forms, the yellow-rumped warbler is found throughout the coniferous forests of the north and the high mountains in summer. A warbler typical of the deep south is the yellow-throated warbler. Its bright yellow throat and strong black and white pattern on the face and sides make it unmistakable. In summer, it is often found in groves of sycamores along southern rivers, where it forages rather slowly in the upper branches. The yellow-throated warbler arrives early in spring on its nesting grounds, and it remains commonly through the winter in parts of Florida. A tiny bird wearing Halloween colors, the Blackburnian warbler is our only warbler with extensive orange on the throat and breast. Its upper parts are blackish, with a pattern of pale stripes. Females and immatures wear a paler orange than adult males, but the pale back stripes give them away. We know the Blackburnian warbler as a summer resident of northern forest, but in winter it is a common bird in the Andes of South America. A warbler of the forest edge and second-growth woods rather than unbroken forest, the chestnut-sided warbler is probably more numerous today than it was 200 years ago. In summer, it is known by its yellow cap, black stripe on the face, and chestnut sides. Its song is much like that of the yellow warbler. In fall, the bird looks very different, with a lime green back and grayish-white underparts. Common in summer in the Northeast, the chestnut-sided warbler spends the winter in Central America. With a golden wing patch and a striking face pattern, the golden-winged warbler is easily recognized. It lives in brushy areas and thickets, especially of alder. Females and young birds are duller, but have the same basic pattern. The golden wing often interbreeds with its close relative, the blue-winged warbler, producing hybrids with intermediate patterns. The blue in the wings is really a subtle blue-gray, so the blue-winged warbler is more easily recognized by its yellow head with a black stripe through the eye. This is another warbler found mainly in brushy areas or second-growth woods. Nesting mostly south of the range of the golden-winged warbler, the blue-winged is gradually expanding its range toward the north. The cerulean blue on the back of the male cerulean warbler can be hard to see at times because the bird is often high overhead in riverside trees. A better mark from underneath is the narrow black ring across the base of the neck. The female has a hint of the male's blue, but lacks the dark necklace. Within its summer range, the cerulean warbler is localized in areas of tall trees and swampy woods. A rather stocky warbler, found in the undergrowth of a deciduous forest, the male black-throated blue warbler is unmistakable. Its pattern of black and dark blue is set off by white on the underparts and a conspicuous white spot in the wing. The female shares the white wing spot, but otherwise her coloring is more subtle, with an olive back, buffy underparts, and dark face patch. Strictly an eastern bird in summer, the black-throated blue warbler spends the winter on islands in the Caribbean. A flash of gold in a dark southeastern swamp is the prothonotary warbler. The unmarked, brilliant yellow of its head and underparts is set off by blue-gray in the wings and tail. Unlike most warblers, the prothonotary builds its nest in a hole in a tree, often in a dead tree surrounded by water. The female prothonotary is somewhat duller, but shows enough of the general color scheme to be recognizable. Very common in summer in parts of the south, this warbler is scarce and local toward the northern end of its range. Although it is rather plain in color, the palm warbler may be recognized by its habit of wagging its tail up and down as it forages, usually on or near the ground. In fall and winter it is brownish, but has a pale stripe over the eye and a spot of yellow under the tail. Males in spring are somewhat more colorful, with chestnut on the crown and more yellow on the underparts. In summer, the palm warbler lives far from any palms, in northern spruce bogs, but in winter it is common in Florida and some nearby areas. The prairie warbler is another species with the tail-wagging habit. It is usually brighter and more yellow than the palm warbler and is less likely to be seen feeding on the ground. The male in spring can be known by the characteristic black stripes on its face and sides. Not a bird of the open prairies, the prairie warbler lives in brushy second-growth woods and in southern mangrove swamps. One of the rarest birds in North America is Kirtland's warbler, found in only a few spots in Michigan. For its summer home, it requires a young stand of jack pine trees less than 15 feet tall, a habitat that exists for only a few years after a fire. This serves as an example of how a forest fire may be a natural and necessary process in certain habitats. Kirtland's warblers migrate every fall from Michigan to a winter range in the Bahamas, but they are almost never seen during migration. The name identifies the habitat because the pine warbler is almost always found in tall pine trees. It is rather heavy set for a warbler and often more deliberate in its movements than most. Males in spring are olive above and yellow on the chest, but have relatively few distinctive markings. Some females and young birds can be very drab, gray or brown. The pine warbler is a short-distance migrant and can be found all year in many areas of the southeast. A colorful bird of the treetops, the male bay-breasted warbler in breeding plumage is unmistakable with its contrasting pattern of black, chestnut, and buffy pink. In summer, it is found in northern woodlands of spruce and other conifers. Before migrating south in fall, it molts into a new identity, mostly greenish, with just a touch of bay on the sides. Summering mostly in eastern and central Canada, the bay-breasted warbler is a common migrant through the eastern states. The male black-pole warbler in spring is a striking bird with white cheeks and a black cap topping off a clean monochrome pattern. It spends the summer in spruce forest of the far north. In fall plumage, the black-pole looks completely different. A streaky yellow-green bird similar to the fall bay-breasted warbler. Its yellow feet sometimes make a good field mark. One of the great travelers among the warblers, the black-pole summers to Alaska and migrates as far as Brazil for the winter. Its name is almost a full description of the male black-throated green warbler, but it also has yellow cheeks and white on the underparts. This is another warbler found mainly in the treetops in coniferous forest in summer. Females and young birds lack most of the black on the throat, but have the same pattern otherwise. Like most of the warblers that nest in the northeast, the black-throated green migrates mostly through the eastern states and is rare in the west. Townsend's warbler is a western replacement for the black-throated green warbler. Some of its songs are almost the same, and it looks similar as well, but the Townsend's has a prominent black patch on the face and more yellow on the underparts. Females and young birds are like a paler version of the male. Summering in humid evergreen forests of the northwest, Townsend's warbler can be found locally in winter along the Pacific coast. Although it lacks bright colors, the black-throated gray warbler is smartly patterned. Its wheezy song is a common sound in summer in western woodlands of juniper and oak. Patches of solid black on the face and crown will separate the black-throated gray from other warblers. Females and young birds are paler than adult males, but show most of the same head pattern. Summering widely in western foothills and canyons, the black-throated gray can be found locally in winter in the southwest. A warbler that frequently behaves like a nuthatch is the black and white warbler. It is often seen foraging on the trunks or larger limbs of trees. Compared to warblers with similar colors, like black-pole or black-throated gray, the black and white may be known by its behavior and by the striped pattern on the top of its head. Although all ages are recognizably similar, adult males have more black on the face and throat than females or immatures. A common summer resident in eastern North America, especially in deciduous woods, the black and white warbler may be found locally in winter in the southeast. Glowing like a candle flame in the woods, the male American redstart wears brilliant patches of orange on the sides, wings, and tail. It often holds the tail and wings half spread, as if to show off this color to best advantage. The female American redstart is more modestly colored, mostly gray instead of black, with the bright orange patches replaced by yellow. Widespread in summer in open woods and forest edge. The American redstart is much more common in the east than in the west, but it may show up as a migrant practically anywhere. A stunning warbler found only in the southwest is the painted redstart. Like the American redstart, it often fans its tail and wings to show off the contrasting pattern there. But this pattern is black and white, and the underparts are deep red at the center. Unlike most warblers, the males and females look the same. The painted redstart lives in mixed forest in canyons in the mountains and builds its nest on the ground. Only in the southwest are there warblers with bright red in the plumage. The male and female red-faced warbler look the same as each other, but completely different from any other bird, with a unique black scarf to frame the red face. This is a common summer resident in mixed woodland of conifers and oaks in high mountain areas. Primarily a Mexican bird, the red-faced warbler is found north into Arizona and New Mexico, but rarely visits the adjacent states. The little northern parula can be hard to spot when it is singing from the top of a tall tree, but it is easily identified by its rising, buzzy song. Blue-gray above and yellow on the chest, it has wing bars and a partial white eye ring. The male has a dark chest band. This warbler hides its nest among hanging strands of vegetation, Spanish moss in the south, other kinds of moss in northern forest. Summering as far south as the Gulf Coast, this bird is called the northern parula because there's another type of parula in the tropics. The Nashville warbler shows fewer obvious markings than many of its relatives, but it can be known by the combination of bright yellow throat, gray head, and complete white ring around the eye. Despite the name, this warbler passes through Nashville only in migration. Its nesting range involves two separate populations, one in the west and one in the northeast. Among the drabbest of warblers at all seasons, always looking olive gray with blurry streaks, is the orange-crowned warbler. The concealed patch of orange on its head is rarely noticeable. This is one of the few warblers that winters commonly in the southern states, and it will sometimes come to bird feeders for suet or fruit. Generally more common in the west than in the east, the orange-crowned warbler can be found all year along the Pacific coast. White eyebrow, gray cap, and green back are the elements of spring plumage in the Tennessee warbler. It looks somewhat like a vireo, but has a snappy three-parted song, marking it as a warbler. Females and fall birds can be much more yellow. Unlike the similar orange-crowned warbler, they lack any streaking below. Another bird that was named on migration, the Tennessee warbler actually summers in spruce forest across Canada, not in Tennessee. It may become more numerous after major outbreaks of the spruce budworm. The only warbler to nest commonly in the southwestern desert, Lucy's warbler, is mostly gray and white, with a very pale face. Small spots of rufous on the crown and rump are diagnostic but may be hard to see. This is one of the few warblers that builds its nest in cavities in trees. An early migrant in both spring and fall, Lucy's warbler arrives in March and is usually gone by September. Open marshes and wet fields are the home of a warbler called the common yellowthroat. The male wears a black mask bordered by white. He frequently makes his presence known with a loud, rapid song or with a distinctive hard call note. The female gives a similar call note but has no black mask and looks rather plain. Although its range covers much of North America, the yellowthroat is absent from places where it cannot find suitable marshes. A warbler that walks on the forest floor, the ovenbird is better known by its loud, ringing song than by sight. Seen in the open, it reveals black stripes underneath, a white eye ring, and a contrasting stripe down the center of the crown. The name ovenbird comes from the shape of its nest, a dome with the entrance on the side, like an old-fashioned oven. Mainly found in the east in summer, the ovenbird also extends well northwest into Canada and reaches the edge of the Rockies. The so-called water thrushes are brown-backed warblers that walk at the water's edge. Unlike the real thrushes, they have pale eyebrow stripes and a habit of bobbing the tail up and down. The northern water thrush is the more widespread of the two species. Its underparts and eyebrow stripe are usually tinged with yellow, and it has a snappy, emphatic song. The northern water thrush breeds across the continent, mostly north of the Canadian border. As a migrant, it is most common in the east. The Louisiana water thrush replaces the northern as a nesting bird in the southeast, although there is some overlap in their summer ranges. In this species, the eyebrow stripe is always bold and white, and the underparts are white with a tinge of cinnamon, never yellow. The song of the Louisiana water thrush has more of a clear, whistled quality. Living close to the ground in humid southeastern woodlands is the warbler. Its pattern is mostly simple, olive above and bright yellow below. But a black hood enclosing the yellow face is the trademark of the male hooded warbler. This is another warbler found in the undergrowth of deciduous woodlands, especially along the edges of swamps. The female may have a trace of the black hood, or may be simply olive and yellow, but the white spots in the tail are often noticeable. Most common in the southeast in summer, the hooded warbler barely reaches the southern edge of Canada. Wilson's warbler would be a rather plain bird without the round black cap it wears. It has a rather long tail, which is often flipped up and down expressively or held above the level of the back. Some females lack the black cap, but they can be recognized by the overall golden color and by the absence of white spots in the tail. Although it is widespread, Wilson's warbler is usually a more common migrant in the west than in the east. Many kinds of warblers nest in Canada, including the Canada warbler, a bird of the undergrowth in dense forest. It is blue-gray above and yellow below, with yellow spectacles, but the best field mark is the necklace of short black streaks on the male. This necklace may be less distinct on females and young birds. For a change in surroundings, the Canada warbler undertakes a long migration, spending the winter in South America. The largest and most bizarre of all warblers is the yellow-breasted chat. Hiding in dense tangles, it sings with all the enthusiasm of a mockingbird, but without the same musical quality, giving off a discordant series of squawks, rattles, and clear notes. It may even sing at night. Widespread in summer across North America, the chat is most common in the southern states. The starling family is native to the Old World, but one species, brought to North America by man around 1890, has become one of the most abundant birds on the continent. The European starling is an adaptable, aggressive bird. It feeds on practically anything, and because it takes over nesting sites from other birds, it has caused serious problems for bluebirds and some other native species. The starling is unrelated to our blackbirds, and it can be recognized by its very short tail and pointed yellow bill. In winter, it develops many white spots and buffy edges on the plumage. Young birds are all gray at first, but have the same shape as the adult. The so-called blackbird group includes many birds with yellow or orange patterns, as well as those that are all black. One of the colorful ones is the bobolink, a bird of hayfields and wet meadows. The male in summer is black below and brightly patterned above. The female is much plainer, fluffy brown with dark stripes, and all bobolinks wear a plumage like this in fall migration. The bobolink is more common in the east than in the west, and it winters in South America. One of the best known of all marsh birds is the red-winged blackbird. The red on its wing is just a patch on the shoulder, bordered in yellow, and at times it is mostly hidden by black feathers. But when the male is singing, his red shoulder patches are displayed prominently. The female redwing is streaky and brown, with a buffy eyebrow. Although it nests in marshes and wet meadows, the redwing may feed in plowed fields or other dry habitats. Almost every freshwater marsh in North America has red-winged blackbirds in summer. In winter, flocks may number in the tens of thousands. In some areas along the Pacific coast, the redwing overlaps in range with the tricolored blackbird, a very similar bird. Tricolored blackbirds are very sociable, usually nesting in dense colonies. The male looks like a redwing, but the red patches on its shoulders are bordered with white, not yellow. The female is almost identical to a dark female red-winged blackbird. The name is the description for the male yellow-headed blackbird. A bird of the inland marshes in the west and Midwest, it often joins other kinds of blackbirds feeding in open, dry fields when it is not nesting. Its harsh, scraping song is considered by some to be the worst bird song in North America. The female yellow-headed blackbird is dusky brown on the back and head, but has enough yellow on the throat to be recognizable. Widespread and common in the marshes in summer, it is much more localized in the Southwest in winter. The chunky, short-tailed blackbird of the open fields is the eastern meadowlark. It wears a camouflage pattern of brown streaks on the back and wings and dusky stripes on the head, but its chest is brilliant yellow, crossed by a bold black V. Walking on the ground in dense grass, probing for insects with its long pointed bill, the meadowlark often flicks its tail nervously. When it flies, the tail shows conspicuous white outer feathers. A permanent resident in parts of the Southwest, the eastern meadowlark is found mostly east of the high plains. In the West, where grassland habitat is more prevalent, the western meadowlark is common. It overlaps the range of the eastern meadowlark in some areas. Although the western may be slightly paler in color, the two species of meadowlark are virtually identical in appearance. The western is most easily recognized by its rich, bubbling song, unlike the clear whistles of the eastern meadowlark. The largest of our blackbirds is the great-tailed grackle of the Southwest. Glossy black with yellow eyes, the male has a very long, broad tail, usually dragging behind the bird like an afterthought. The grackle gives an incredible variety of calls, including squeaks, whistles, and rattles. Females are browner and somewhat smaller, and are usually quieter as well, except when their nesting colonies are disturbed. The great-tailed grackle is a success story among birds. In recent years, it has more than doubled its range in the United States, spreading well north into the Great Plains. Limited to the immediate coastline, except in the interior of Florida, is the boat-tailed grackle. This is another very large blackbird with glossy plumage. It usually looks rounder-headed than the great-tailed grackle. On the Atlantic coast, it usually has yellow eyes, but on the Gulf Coast, its eyes are usually dark, unlike the great-tailed, which is also found there. Female bolt-tailed grackles are brown and smaller than the males. Widespread in the north and east is the common grackle. It looks like a smaller edition of the male great-tailed or boat-tailed grackles, but its tail is not quite so exaggerated in shape, and it has richer iridescence of bronze or purple in the plumage. Common grackles often nest in dense evergreens. In winter, they wander through the countryside in large flocks, associating with other kinds of blackbirds as they feed in fields and marshes. Traditionally a bird of the east, the common grackle has been extending its range toward the west in recent years. In open country of the west, Brewer's blackbird is often conspicuous, feeding on the ground around ranch houses, pastures, and plowed fields. The male is glossy black with yellow eyes, like a grackle, but it does not have the grackle's excessively long tail. Female Brewer's blackbirds are solid dusky gray and have dark brown eyes. In recent years, Brewer's blackbird has extended its summer range eastward to the Great Lakes. In winter, it can be found locally as far east as the Carolinas. In breeding plumage, the male rusty blackbird looks almost identical to Brewer's blackbird, but without most of the iridescent gloss on the plumage. In fall and winter, it becomes a much more distinctive bird with rich, rusty edges on the feathers and a buffy eyebrow stripe. Rusty blackbirds are usually found feeding on the ground in swamps and other wet places. Nesting around northern bogs and wintering in the southeast, the rusty blackbird is a very early migrant in spring. Before the Pilgrims landed, the cowbird was a buffalo bird, following the great herds of bison on the Great Plains. Today, flocks of brown-headed cowbirds can be seen around cattle anywhere in North America, waiting for the grazing animals to flush insects from the grass. The spread of the cowbird has meant trouble for other species. The female cowbird lays her eggs in the nests of other birds, forcing the foster parents to raise young cowbirds instead of their own. Found in practically all habitats in summer, the brown-headed cowbird is more localized in winter, when its flocks are always in open country. The bronzy sheen of the bronzed cowbird is not an obvious field mark. It is more easily recognized by the ruff of feathers on its neck and at close range by its red eye. A resident of the Southwest, the bronzed cowbird is a nest parasite like the brown-headed, but tends to be more specialized in its targets. The female usually lays her eggs in the nests of orioles or other medium-sized birds. Found mainly in Arizona and Texas, this cowbird has been expanding its range, with some showing up as far east as Florida. Orioles are treetop birds, the males with striking color patterns. Our most familiar species is the northern oriole. The eastern form of this species, often called Baltimore oriole, is common in summer in elms and other shade trees. Its nest is an intricately woven bag hanging from the end of a branch. The Baltimore is the only orange and black oriole native to the east. The female is plainer, mostly dusky above and yellow-orange below. The western form of this bird, sometimes called Bullock's oriole, looks very different in adult male plumage. It has an orange eyebrow and face and a big white wing patch. Both forms of northern oriole are widespread and common in their respective ranges in summer. Where they overlap on the western Great Plains, they produce hybrids of intermediate appearance. The male orchard oriole wears dark chestnut tones, unlike the orange or yellow shown by its relatives. It is also our smallest oriole. When it is foraging in the dense foliage of the treetops, it can be hard to spot, but its rich, rapid song will give it away. The female is a much more greenish yellow than the female northern oriole. Found over much of the east in summer, the orchard oriole is rare toward the northern edge of its range. Most male orioles have black heads, but this one has a hood of orange surrounding the black face. The hooded oriole is a bird of the west and southwest, often found around palm trees where it may build its nest. The female hooded oriole is mostly plain greenish yellow. It has a thinner and more decurved bill than most other orioles. A summer resident from Texas to California, the hooded oriole may sometimes stay through the winter, visiting hummingbird feeders for the sugar water. Scott's oriole, a bird of dry foothills and western grasslands, wears a striking pattern of yellow and black. Its rich, warbling song may bring to mind the voice of the western meadowlark. The nest is often placed in a yucca plant, where it is protected by the sharp-pointed leaves. The female Scott's oriole is more dusky olive yellow than most species, and it may have much black on the face. Common in summer in the southwest and Great Basin region, Scott's oriole rarely stays through the winter near the Mexican border. Most tanagers are brightly colored tropical birds. Only a few species are found north of the Mexican border. Our tanagers have rather thick, pale bills. They feed mainly on insects in the treetops. In southern woods, the languid whistles of this bird might be passed off as the song of a robin. But when it is seen, the male summer tanager is easily recognized because no other bird in its range is unmarked rose red all over. It is common in dry woods of oak and pine in the southeast and along rivers in the southwest. The female is dull golden yellow, somewhat darker on the back, and is best known by the typical tanager bill shape. At the northern end of its range, the summer tanager tends to be scarce and localized. Flaming scarlet with black wings and tail, the male scarlet tanager is unmistakable. Its rather hoarse, burry song is a common sound in summer in deciduous forest of the northeast, but the bird may be difficult to spot among the dense foliage of the treetops. The female scarlet is a more greenish yellow than the female summer tanager and has darker wings. The nesting range of scarlet tanager is centered farther north than that of the summer tanager, but the two are found side by side in some places. It has far less red than other tanagers, but the male western tanager has a striking pattern all its own, bright yellow and black with a red head. It is a common summer bird in evergreen forest of the west. The female is greenish yellow, but has two pale wing bars, unlike other female tanagers. It might be mistaken for a female oriole, but it has a thicker, shorter bill. Although they nest in coniferous forest, migrant western tanagers can be seen in all habitats, even in the desert. Birds with short, thick bills used for cracking seeds include the grosbeaks, buntings, sparrows, and towhees, among others. For convenience, they may be known collectively as finches. These are among the birds most easily enticed to backyard feeding trays with offerings of birdseed. No fewer than 7 states have chosen the popular northern cardinal as their official state bird. Its brilliant red color, black mask, and crested head make the male cardinal unmistakable, and its whistled song can bring cheer to the coldest of winter days. A frequent visitor to bird feeders, it is notably fond of sunflower seeds. The female cardinal is more modestly colored but has the same crest and the same bright red bill. Called northern only because it has relatives farther south in the tropics, the cardinal is actually most common in the southern states. Found alongside the cardinal in parts of the southwest is its relative, the piruloxia. Common in many desert areas, the piruloxia is another crested bird, but the male is mostly gray, with touches of red in the plumage. Its call notes and song can be very similar to those of the cardinal. The female lacks most of the red and might easily be mistaken for a female cardinal. However, the thick, stubby bill of the piruloxia is yellow, not red, and the piruloxia has a longer crest. In the treetops of eastern deciduous woodlands, the male rose-breasted grosbeak is sometimes uncommon but always unmistakable. Its black and white pattern is accented with a rose-red triangle on the chest and rosy patches hidden under each wing. The streaky brown female might be mistaken for a sparrow, but she has a very thick bill and a strong contrasting pattern on the head and wings. The rose-breasted grosbeak is only a summer resident in North America. Rarely, one will show up at a bird feeder in winter. A fast, whistled song in western woodland, sounding like a nervous robin, is the voice of the black-headed grosbeak. This bird is often very common in the oaks in canyons and foothills. The male is patterned in rusty orange and black, with big white spots and bars in the wings. The female looks very similar to the female rose-breasted grosbeak, but is more buffy on the underparts, with fewer dark streaks. Found all over the West in summer, the black-headed grosbeak overlaps with the rose-breasted on the western Great Plains. A chunky bird of dense thickets in the south, the male blue grosbeak is blue all over except for broad bars of reddish-brown in the wings. Its very thick, heavy bill will distinguish it from all other blue birds in North America. The female blue grosbeak is brown, with hardly a trace of blue, but it has the same thick bill and wide, buffy wing bars. Very common in the southern states and rare in the north, the blue grosbeak. The male painted bunting wears a color pattern that is almost unbelievable, with patches of red, blue, and lime green. This gaudiness is often hidden because the painted bunting is usually a shy and elusive denizen of thickets in the south. It may perch in the open when singing. The female is as plain as a female indigo bunting, but is entirely unmarked green. Found in summer locally across the southeast, the painted bunting sometimes comes to bird feeders in Florida in winter. The lazuli bunting, a sky blue bird with a rusty chest, is a western replacement for the indigo bunting. It might be mistaken for a bluebird, but the lazuli has a short, thick bill, like other buntings, and prominent white wing bars. The female is plain pale brown, more buffy on the chest, and has whitish or buff wing bars. The lazuli bunting is common in summer in brushy, open woods. On the western Great Plains, it may interbreed with the indigo bunting. In farmland and prairie country of the Midwest, the dickcissel can be heard singing an approximation of its name in summer. The male is a handsome finch with a yellow eyebrow, chestnut shoulders, and a black patch on the yellow chest. The female is duller and does not have the black patch. In various parts of its summer range, the dickcissel may be common one year but rare the next. Now found mostly west of the Mississippi, it was once common on the Atlantic seaboard as well. A stocky finch of the western plains, the male lark bunting is unmistakable in summer when it is black with bold white wing patches. It often flutters above the prairie while giving its complicated song. The female is a plainer bird with brown streaks, but it has a hint of the white wing patch. In winter, when the male is brown like the female, flocks of lark buntings range over the southwestern grasslands. Most common in summer just east of the Rockies, The lark bunting may extend its range to new areas in years of good rainfall. In its usual role, scratching among dead leaves on the ground under dense thickets, the rufous-sided towhee may go unnoticed. But when it comes out in the open, it is easily recognized by its black and chestnut pattern, with a white stripe down the stomach and white spots in the wings and tail. Female towhees in the east are patterned like males, but with the black replaced by brown. Rufous-sided towhees in the west have heavy white spotting on the back, and the females are usually black or gray above, not brown. Rufous-sided towhees are common over most of the warmer parts of North America, nesting in deciduous forest or pine oak woods. The brown towhee of the west has few distinctive markings aside from the rusty patch under the tail. Like other towhees, it scratches on the ground among dry leaves. Along the Pacific coast, the brown towhee is often found in backyards. In the interior of the Southwest, it is usually in canyons or foothills. The coastal and interior populations of brown towhee have very different voices, and some researchers believe they represent two different species. Dense riverside growth in the desert Southwest provides a haven for Hebert's towhee. It is a warmer cinnamon brown color than the brown towhee, and it has a paler bill, but is most easily recognized by the irregular black patch on its face. The calls of Hebert's towhee are sharp and ringing, and they are heard far more often than the bird is seen, since it usually hides in thick undergrowth. The olive green on the green-tailed towhee covers not only the tail but also the back and wings, providing contrast for the gray underparts and the small rusty cap. This small towhee, the size of a large sparrow, is often detected by its soft, cat-like mewing call. The green-tailed towhee is a mountain bird in summer, found in thickets at high elevations. It winters in brush near streams in the Southwest. When most people think of sparrows, what they have in mind is the abundant house sparrow introduced to this continent from Europe. Our native sparrows, like the white-throated sparrow, are not city birds, but they will come into town to visit bird feeders. The white-throated sparrow is known by the yellow spot in front of its eye, its head stripes of white or tan, and its neatly defined white throat. Young whitethroats during their first winter are browner and duskier overall, with less distinct head stripes. A summer bird of northern woods, the white-throated sparrow is common in winter in the eastern states and very uncommon in the west. More prevalent in the west than in the east is the white-crowned sparrow. It has contrasting head stripes, but no distinct patch on the throat, and its bill is pink, not black. The bird usually has a cleaner and grayer look than the white-throated sparrow. Young white crowns have head stripes of chestnut and buff. Large flocks of white-crowned sparrows can be found in winter in brushy places in the west. Most white crowns nest in the high Arctic or the high mountains and have to leave for the winter, but along parts of the Pacific coast they are present all year. A big, dusky sparrow, related to the white-crowned, the golden-crowned sparrow, may not always show the gold on the crown. The adult in breeding plumage has heavy black stripes bordering the gold patch, but immatures and many winter adults are mostly brown on the head. This is a western bird, often found in mixed flocks with white-crowned sparrows in winter. Summering in Alaska and western Canada, the golden-crowned sparrow winters mainly along the Pacific coast and is rare in other western states. Harris's sparrow is a specialty of the interior of the continent, nesting in central Canada and wintering on the eastern edge of the Great Plains. It is a rare visitor east and west of this range. This is one of our... The song may not be very musical, but it has a quick and cheerful quality, making the song sparrow a popular bird in parks and gardens. It is striped above and below, and the stripes on the chest often coalesce into a central dark spot. Song sparrows are not especially shy, but they like to have dense bushes nearby for cover. Unlike some other kinds of sparrows, they are found only in pairs or family groups, never in large flocks. Across their wide range, song sparrows vary in size and in their shade of brown, but all have the same basic pattern. Lincoln's sparrow is a shy and elusive bird found in dense brush and wet thickets. Even in areas where it is common, it never travels in flocks. It looks something like a song sparrow, but tends to look more richly colored, with a buffy chest crossed by narrow black streaks. Lincoln's sparrow has a softer and more musical song than the song sparrow. Nesting in the north and in high mountains, Lincoln's is generally much more common in the west than in the east. Cattail marshes and other wet places attract the swamp sparrow. It is a chunky, dark-looking sparrow, gray on the underparts and chestnut on the back and wings. In summer, it usually has a rufous cap. In its dense habitat, the swamp sparrow can be difficult to see, but like other sparrows, it can often be lured into the open with squeaking noises. Although the swamp sparrow is widespread in summer in northern marshes, it is most common in the east. Among our native sparrows, none is more common in backyards in summer than the little chipping sparrow. It has a reddish cap in summer, set off by a white eyebrow and black stripe through the eye. Its underparts are plain, pale gray. The dry rattle of its song might be passed off as the sound of an insect. In winter, the chipping sparrow may look much browner on the head, but traces of the reddish cap usually show through. Found almost throughout the continent in summer, the chipping sparrow mostly withdraws to the southern tier of states for the winter. The American tree sparrow seems to be poorly named. It is no more partial to trees than the other sparrows, and is usually found in loose flocks in weedy fields in the winter. It has a reddish cap, like the chipping sparrow, but the tree sparrow has a bicolored bill, a black spot in the center of the chest, and a more musical voice. The calendar is often the best way to tell these two sparrows apart. The tree sparrow is found only in the far north in summer. South of Canada, it shows up only in winter, when most chipping sparrows have gone farther south. A rather long-tailed sparrow of brushy, overgrown fields is the field sparrow. It has a rufous cap, like several other kinds of sparrows, but its pale face gives it something of a baby-faced expression, and it has a pink bill at all seasons. The song of the field sparrow has a clear and plaintive quality, and the bird may sing all day, even in summer's heat. Found only east of the Rockies, the field sparrow is widespread in summer, but winters mostly in the deep south. In open country of the west, one of the most common sparrows is also one of the plainest. Brewer's sparrow is pale gray-brown with narrow black streaks on the upper parts and unmarked grayish-white below. Despite its plain appearance, it enlivens the open sagebrush desert with its complicated song of churs and chips and trills. Flocks of brewer's sparrows may even sing on warm days in winter. Nesting both on sage flats and above tree line in the mountains, brewer's sparrow spends the winter in arid brush of the southwest. At first glance, the vesper sparrow may seem like a streaky brown bird with no real field marks. But with a closer look, it shows a white eye ring, a small rusty patch at the shoulder, and white outer tail feathers. The musical song of the Vesper sparrow is heard in open meadows and dry fields in summer, often in the evening. The Vesper sparrow is common in both the east and the west, and winters all across the southern tier of states. A small sparrow of open fields, the savanna sparrow is best known by its short-tailed shape, fine streaks on the chest, and dark stripes on the crown. It usually has a yellow stripe over the eye. Not as elusive as some of the grassland sparrows, the savanna may perch in the open on weeds or fence wires. It is sometimes in flocks with Vesper sparrows in winter. Nesting from the Arctic tundra south to the prairies, the savanna sparrow is common in winter in southern fields. The dry, buzzing sound of a grasshopper in an open field may actually be coming from a bird, the grasshopper sparrow. This is a small, chunky sparrow with a short tail and a flat-headed look. Its crown is marked with two heavy, dark stripes, and it has an unmarked, buffy chest. When it is not singing, it hides in the grass, where the intricate streaking of its back gives it good camouflage. The grasshopper sparrow has a rather patchy range in summer. On its winter range in the southern states, it is easily overlooked. Salt marshes along the Atlantic coast and Gulf Coast provide the only home of the seaside sparrow. With many local populations, the seaside sparrow is variable in appearance, but all have a long-billed look, a yellow spot in front of the eye, streaks on the underparts, and a harsh, buzzy song. Because of its narrow habitat, this bird is vulnerable to disturbance. One local form, called the dusky seaside sparrow, is now extinct. With a face pattern like a quail and a rather long tail rimmed in white, the lark sparrow is one of the most distinctive members of its tribe. It prefers semi-open country, where areas of bare ground are interspersed with brush or dry woods. The lark sparrow is less elusive than many other sparrows, and flocks can often be found perching in the open. It is most common in the west, where its arid habitat is easy to find, and it is scarce and local east of the Mississippi River. In the deserts of the Southwest, living on or close to the ground, is the smartly patterned black-throated sparrow. Plain and unmarked on the back and underparts, it has sharp white stripes on the face, setting off the black throat patch. Its song has a rather metallic quality, and it also gives light, tinkling call notes. The summer range of the black-throated sparrow is somewhat variable. It may be more widespread in drought years. The junco, often called snowbird, is only a winter visitor to most neighborhoods. Recognized by its soft gray color, white outer tail feathers, short, pale bill, and ticking call note, it frequently comes to bird feeders in the company of white-throated sparrows or other birds. Dark-eyed juncos in the east are all gray and white, but in the west they are more variable. Some western juncos have dark hoods and rusty brown sides. Others are mostly gray with reddish back patches. Juncos nest in the coniferous forest of the north and the mountains, and winter in brushy areas, towns, and open woods. The rich, warbled song of the Lapland longspur is a sound for cold climates, because this bird breeds only on the tundra of the high Arctic. A rusty neck patch and a white border to the black face and chest mark the male in summer plumage. When Lapland longspurs come down from the north, they are more obscurely patterned, with much dark brown and chestnut on the back and wings. Flocks of longspurs feed on the ground in winter, on prairies, plowed fields, and beaches, often with horned larks. Found at temperate latitudes all year is the chestnut-collared longspur. nesting on the Great Plains and wintering on southwestern grasslands. The male in summer is distinctive with a buffy face, black chest, and half collar of chestnut. It often sings in flight, hovering above the prairie. In winter, the chestnut-collared longspur can be much plainer. When winter flocks are flushed from the grass, they show much white in the tail, and they give a soft, double-noted call in flight. When the snow flies in late autumn, flocks of ghostly pale snow buntings come down from the far north. Feeding on the ground in barren fields and along shorelines, they are often in flocks with Lapland longspurs or horned larks. The pallid look, pale brown wash, and big white wing patches identify the snow bunting in winter. It is more distinctly marked in summer when the male is all black and white. Nesting only on the high Arctic rim of the continent, the snow bunting winters mainly near the Canadian border. Unrelated to our native sparrows, the house sparrow was brought to North America from Europe more than a century ago. It thrives on the doorstep of civilization, and today it is a noisy and abundant resident of cities, suburbs, and farms all over the continent. The adult male is almost attractive, with a black throat and a chestnut and gray head pattern. The female has more subtle markings. Although the house sparrow is found practically wherever there are houses, it is still absent from most wild and undisturbed areas. With a cheerful, warbling song and a touch of red in the plumage, the house finch is a common and popular bird in cities and towns. It is native to the American West, although in the East it is a newcomer. The male can be recognized by its red eyebrow, red chest, and brown streaks on the sides. The female has a relatively unmarked brown head and blurry brown streaks on the underparts, unlike the female house sparrow. Native to the West, the house finch was accidentally introduced near New York around 1940, and the eastern population is still spreading. Although it is often confused with the house finch, the purple finch is a chunkier, shorter-tailed bird with a more uniform wash of dull rose red in the male. Its song is usually richer and lower-pitched. The female purple has a more contrasting pattern on the face than the female house finch. Purple finches are fairly common birds of open woods in the north, wandering south in small flocks in winter. The range of the purple finch covers much of the east and the Pacific coast, but skips most of the areas in between. Replacing the purple finch in the Rockies and overlapping with it on the Pacific coast is Cassin's finch. It sometimes moves into the southwestern lowlands in winter. The male is almost identical to the male purple finch, but is slightly larger and paler. It has a sharply contrasting red cap, brighter than any other area of the plumage. The female Cassin's finch has sharper, narrower streaks on the underparts than the female purple finch. A tiny finch of the far north, the redpoll is only a winter visitor in areas south of the Arctic. Its red cap, black chin, and plaintive call notes are all good field marks. Males have a pink wash on the chest. Little flocks of redpolls are found in weedy fields and open woods in winter, or they may come to bird feeders for Niger or thistle seeds. Like several of their relatives that are referred to as winter finches, redpolls are very unpredictable in their winter invasions. A winter finch that is streaky and brown is the pine siskin. It might be mistaken for some kind of sparrow, but the siskin has a thin, spiky bill and patches of yellow hidden in the wings and tail. Flocks of siskins may be found feeding in the treetops or in weedy fields, making a variety of plaintive whistles, soft rattles, and buzzy notes. Nesting in the north and in the mountains, the pine siskin has a variable winter range, but sometimes arrives in large numbers throughout the southern states. Nicknamed wild canary, the male American goldfinch in summer is brilliant yellow with black and white trim, including a small black cap tipped forward on its head. The female is paler yellow without most of the black. Both male and female lose much of the yellow in winter and look more golden brown. Goldfinches may be found in mixed flocks with pine siskins in winter, foraging in weedy fields or coming to feeders for thistle seed. Found across much of North America, the American goldfinch often nests in late summer, using thistledown to line its nest. In the west and southwest, found alongside the American goldfinch in some places is the lesser goldfinch. It is a common bird along rivers, through dry country, and around meadows in open woodland. The male lesser goldfinch always has a black cap, but its back may be either black or green. White patches in the wings and tail are sometimes noticeable. The female is smaller and more solidly greenish yellow than the female American goldfinch. Above tree line in the western mountains and on barren ground in the far north, the rosy finch is adapted to life in cold climates. It is often seen picking up frozen insects from snowbanks. Rosy finches are variable in color. Most local forms have a gray head patch, but the body plumage can be blacker or browner, making the rose color more or less obvious. In winter, flocks of rosy finches may move from the peaks down to middle elevations in the mountains or even out onto the plains. The bizarre crossed bill of the red crossbill is designed for prying open the cones of spruce trees and other evergreens to get at the seeds inside. At a distance, this bill shape can be hard to see, but the male red crossbill is identified as a short-tailed, brick red bird with blackish wings. The female is dull yellow-green, with dark wings and tail. When flocks of red crossbills fly overhead, they may be detected by their hard, double-noted call. This winter finch wanders erratically in search of good cone crops, and in a given season it can be abundant or absent. It may often nest in midwinter. The other crossbill is called the white-winged crossbill, but its wings are mostly black, with 2 white bars. The male white-winged is a paler rose color than the red crossbill. The female is yellow-green, sometimes with a streaky or mottled look, and has the same white wing bars. The white-winged is just as unpredictable in its travels as the red crossbill, but it tends to be found farther north. The pine grosbeak is a big northern finch with a long tail and short bill, usually found in spruces and firs, not pines. It is rather tame, allowing a close approach. The male is rosy and gray with white wing bars. Females and young birds are mostly gray with mustard yellow on the head. Although the pine grosbeak can be found all year in the boreal forest and in high mountains of the west, it invades the northern states in small numbers during some winters. One of the most colorful of the winter finches, arriving unpredictably in noisy flocks, is the robust, golden yellow evening grosbeak. The yellow eyebrow and burnt gold color mark the adult male. The female wears softer colors. In any plumage, evening grosbeaks have thick, pale bills and a striking black and white pattern in the wings. At feeders, these birds will consume large amounts of sunflower seed. But because they add so much life and color to the wintry landscape, they're welcome visitors. A century ago, evening grosbeaks were only scarce winter wanderers to the northeast, but now they are found there at all seasons and are very common in some winters.